Good evening. We are glad to see you here tonight for our summer series. I think this is the third week of the summer series. We're very excited to have everybody here tonight. I want to draw your attention to just a few folks on the prayer list and just a couple announcements before I give a quick introduction for our speaker. And you can grab a bulletin to make sure you keep up with our prayer list as well. But a few things to announce here at the beginning. Rosalind Bedingfield and Jamie Walker both had successful surgeries on Monday, and they are now home and recovering. Sharon Lyle also had surgery on Monday. The surgery went well, and they expect her to be in the hospital a few more days, and then she will begin what is a long recovery process at home. So please remember her and Rob in your prayers. That's Sharon Lyle. Also, Joy and Ashlyn Daly are traveling home from MD Anderson tomorrow. I believe they got there Monday, and they're traveling back tomorrow. Please pray for safe travels for them and also for test results that are positive results that they certainly will be uplifting for them. Also, please keep in mind Bree Foster's 1-year-old niece, Aurora Vanston. She will have heart surgery on Friday, just 1 year old. So please keep Aurora, her medical teams, and all of her family, including Bree, in your prayers. We also extend our sympathy to the family of Sally Wadsworth. Sally passed away on Saturday. Her visitation will be from 9:30 to 10:30 on May 29th at Gassett Funeral Home in Wetumpka. So that's at 9:30 on the 29th at Gassett Funeral Home in Wetumpka. There will be a family graveside service on the 29th at 11:30 at Greenwood Serenity Memorial Gardens here in Montgomery. And then lastly, on the prayer list, we want to also extend our sympathy to James and Michelle Russell in the passing of James' father, Jim, who passed away yesterday. Visitation for Jim will be on Friday at Leak Memory from 5 to 7, and the funeral will be held at Dalraida Church of Christ on Saturday at 2, with a visitation at 1. And the burial will be at Alabama Heritage following the service. Also, a couple quick announcements. We want to make everyone aware that the church office will be closed on Monday for Memorial Day. And if you're interested in contributing to the needs of our prison ministry, they are currently in need of disposable razors for the prison ministry. Now, if you'd like to mark the invitation song, Brother Dustin Jones will be leading that song for us in just a few moments, number 125. It will not be on the screens tonight, but you're invited to mark that song. It'll be number 125 when our speaker has finished. Our speaker tonight, not that many people know him, so we need to give him a long introduction. Andrew Itzen is here. No, but certainly he does not need any introduction here, but just in case we have a few visiting, we would like to give him a quick introduction. Andrew grew up here in Montgomery. Andrew, after graduating over at Faulkner, was the college minister here at university for several years. He was actually my college minister when he was here, and he survived all those years. So might be his best accomplishment. But he was the college minister here. After that, he was the preacher at the Robertsdale Church of Christ. And then I believe it was in 2021 that 2021 moved to Madison to serve as one of the preaching ministers up in Madison. Church, we have a lot of connections, and we love our brothers and sisters up there, certainly. We really appreciate Andrew, and Andrew, we're so glad that you're here with us tonight, and I won't take any more of your time.
Ted Turner is a multi-billionaire, and what got him his multi-billions was the fact that he owned a lot of businesses, of course, TBS and CNN, and I think that's kind of what he's known for. But one of the things a lot of folks don't know about Ted Turner is that when he turned 15 and his mom brought him the birthday cake, and you know how it usually goes, the birthday cake's in front of you and somebody tells you to do what? Make a wish, right? And he made a wish, and this is what he wished, that one day he would go into mission work. At the age of 15, Ted wanted to be a missionary. Well, soon after that birthday, what ended up happening was he heard that his sister contracted something called lupus. And lupus is a very serious sickness still now, but then at that time, there was not the way to treat it and to take care of it like there was today like there is then. And so what ended up happening with Ted's sister, she got really, really sick. And the doctor said, we're not sure if she's going to make it. She might. And so what happened for Ted is every single day, whenever the bell rang at school, he would hop on his bicycle. He would pedal as fast as he could home, drop the bike in the driveway, run inside, go sit at his sister's lap. And he would hold her hand every single night till she would go to sleep. And he wouldn't just hold her hand. What he also did, and he joined his father, and the way Ted put it in their biography is that the father, his dad, was like the spiritual anchor of their home. And so every night, Ted, along with his father, would sit there and they would pray for their daughter and his sister to get well. Well, a few months later, the little girl passed away. And when the little girl passed away, what also happened is that the father also lost his faith. In fact, in Ted's biography, this is what the dad said. He said, if he's that kind of God, then I don't want to have anything to do with him. And then Ted said this, well, where was God when my little sister passed away? I'll go ahead and tell you, those two statements are frankly just really hard for me to say. But I also say them and I bring them up not just because they have a lot to do with our text tonight, but I would also dare to say that there's a lot of people in this room that have said something similar to that. And maybe what you've said is this, God, why are you doing something over there but not something over here? And like, why are you helping them? And even they're doing a lot of things that are evil and wrong, and I'm doing the right thing, but I'm not getting the answer that they're getting. And God, where were you when I lost my job? And where were you when my family member decided to walk away? And where are you in the middle of this trouble we're having in our marriage? What I'm saying is, I think on some level, we've asked a question very similar to that. And here's why it's very important to talk about those very difficult questions like, God, where are you when this happens is, we can go to the next slide. There we go. Is that when life disappoints or we're going through a time of doubt, one of three things happens. Number one, sometimes we lose our faith altogether. We're kind of like Ted Turner and his dad. Well, if that's the kind of God he is, and this happened, then I'm going to walk away from him. Number two, sometimes we do this. We isolate the questions we have from our faith. And this is a really big deal because if some of you have heard of Barna Research Group or a guy named David Kinnaman, he wrote a book called You Lost Me. And the whole point of that book was to look at why 18 to 25-year-olds are walking away from faith. And in that book, one of the things that was talked about is one of the top 5 reasons why 18 to 25-year-olds walk away from their faith is this is what they put, is they never felt like they had a safe place to wrestle with, to express and deal with their doubts. And we're going to talk about those doubts in just a second. But we also know this about doubt, that there is such thing as a good, healthy doubt. And we'll talk about what that means, and an unhealthy doubt. And so sometimes what we'll do is we'll think, well, my faith is not at the point where it can deal with some of the more difficult questions. You know, that maybe, why would I bring this before a preacher? Why would I bring this before my parent? And if you've ever been there before, I want to tell you, number one, there's 2 books in the Bible. You got the book of Psalms, and you've got the book of Lamentations. Both of those are books where people brought their frustrations and their disappointments. And what we know about God is that God answered those and welcomed those. But the other thing is this, is that sometimes people press deeper into faith. That even though the pain and the difficulty of what they're going through and experiencing is very real and it's hurtful, what they learn in the depths of despair and what they learn in the depths of difficulty is that God's love is still greater than those depths of despair. And so knowing that these are oftentimes one of 3 things that people do or turn to during a time of disappointment, I want us to turn to John chapter 11. And one of the reasons why I love this text so much is it's like all parts of the Bible, of course, but I especially love this one because there's some texts, as we all know, that are just really easy to insert yourself into. Because you're going to find yourself probably like I am as I went through this, like, yeah, I've been there and I'm there now, or I will be, and I could foresee how that's a dilemma. And what I want us to do as we dig into this text is I want us to look at these two things. Who are we, number one, during a time of disappointment? But number two, who is God during a time of disappointment? And as we get into that, I want to go ahead and jump into the text. And this is what it says in verse 1. It says, "Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. So the sisters sent to him saying, 'Lord, the one you love is sick.'" One of the commentaries brought this up, that more than likely growing up, Jesus, Mary, Martha, and Lazarus were like the best of friends. Of course, we understand there was definitely family connections there, but if they would have had birthday parties then, they would have gone to each other's birthday parties. They would have done a lot of things together. They would have hung out together. They saw each other grow up. They went through disappointments together. And so because of that, they would have been tight. So if Jesus is going to help anybody, who's it going to be? Well, this guy. And I told you that with all of the Bible, we need to insert ourselves, but especially this one, because what I've found about this one is kind of like a lot of things in the Bible, that you don't just read it, but it reads you. And that's what you're going to find in just a second. And as we do this, to try to make ourselves as much, I guess, putting ourselves into the text as possible, I want us to look at it from these two perspectives. Number one, every single one of us in this room have a Lazarus. And what I mean by that is something in our life that desperately needs some life. It might be the faith of a family member. One of them has walked away from faith, and we desperately want that to come back to life. Maybe for some of us, it's a diagnosis that was recently received by yourself or somebody you love. Maybe for some of you, it's a child. Like they have walked away from faith, and they're at a point right now where they don't seem to be interested with anything in connection with God. And so you desperately want that to come back to life. We'll call that the Lazarus, okay? But the other thing is this, is that whenever we have a Lazarus, that one thing in life that disappoints us, that one thing that we might be experiencing some doubt in, we also have this, either an uppercase G God or a lowercase g God that we turn to. And here's what I mean by that. Whenever life disappoints, every single person has this in common. We run to something. We either run to Yahweh, we run to God, or we run to a substance. We run to God, or we run to a relationship. We run to God, or we run to a job. At Madison, we have a ministry called Project Rescue, and us, along with Beltline, helps with this house for men that are in addiction recovery. And they come to Madison every single Wednesday night, and we have a class that our members and they join together with. And one of the things that's been the most interesting to hear them say is that when life has disappointed, that's when they ran to something. And it's kind of interesting to hear them talk about that. And sometimes it can be easy to think, well, man, I hate that you had that happen. But the more I hear it, the more like, well, yeah, we do the same thing too. And maybe for some of us, again, we run to a job. Maybe you've run to a person before. And the reality is, if you run to a person to fix your needs, whoever it is, no matter how great of a person they are, that person, that wife, that husband, that child, that mother, father, whoever it is, they might be great, but I'll tell you this, they make a very lousy God. That if we look to people to try to meet a need that only God can fill, that person will always be the wrong person. And so maybe for some of us, it's the fact that we've run to not God, but something else. And so what I'm saying is, what we choose to do next when life disappoints is so incredibly important. And so as we think about that, let's go to the next verse. It says that when Jesus heard this, he said this illness is not going to lead to death. It's actually going to lead to the glory of God. I don't know if you guys have known people like I have that got a horrible diagnosis. In fact, I know somebody very well that got a terrible diagnosis. And when they did, they made this statement a few months later with a very terrible ending to it, is what they heard, is they said, Andrew, this is one of the best things that's ever happened to me. Now, for me to hear that, I'm like, I don't really understand how you could say that, knowing what you're going through. But I also don't know really where they were at in their relationship with God. And maybe for them, God used that pain, that difficulty to draw them closer to God. I'm saying that to say we all know somebody that has been in that kind of spot. that even in the middle of a very difficult situation, it might not be this week, it might not be next week, it might be years down the road, and frankly, there's times in Scripture we find out what you might not find out in this life, but that God is going to bring some glory out of whatever that was. And then it says this, so Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer. Now, that doesn't seem to make sense because if we're saying, all right, he loved, we think, well, love what? Well, love moves. And so if you really love, then you're going to be high-tailing it to help him. But he says, you know what? I love, and so I'm going to stay. Now, I want you for just a second to think about your Lazarus, and I want you to think about that one thing that disappoints you. And you think about God's timetable. That a lot of times if it is a delay, it seems like a denial, right? But he's about to show us that not all those, what we think of as delays, are necessarily God's denials, because this is what he's saying next. He said, listen, our friend Lazarus, he's just fallen asleep. But I'm going to go wake him up. And so the disciples said, Lord, if he is asleep, he's just going to recover. Do you see what they're saying? He's not asleep, he's dead. Like, there's a big difference in asleep and dead. And he's like, well, yeah, to you there are. To you, sleep and death are two different things. But what I'm letting you know is just as I can go to somebody and shake them and wake them up, I also want you to know that when someone is at that lowest point of death, I can wake them up too. Now, think about that for a second. Think about your Lazarus for just a second. I don't know always how he does it, and I'm grateful for that. But I also get frustrated, probably like you do, that the timetable doesn't seem to always make sense, but in a very weird, difficult way that also is what makes God God. I'm very grateful that we don't serve a God that we can limit to our own two-dimensional time and space. I'm so grateful that we serve a God that we can't and we won't be able to ever fit inside of a box. You even think about the words that are in Scripture that are used to describe God. You know what it's called? It's called anthropomorphism, which is giving human characteristics to a holy God. You know why we do that? That's all we got. And so we're trying to put someone that is far beyond our understanding, far beyond our timeline, on our timeline. What he's trying to do is he's trying to let them know, I'm not on your timeline and I'm still going to get glory. In fact, this is what it says, is when Jesus came there, he found that Lazarus had already been dead. It says he was in the tomb for 4 days. Now, here's why this is a big deal. During this day, there was a pagan belief that unfortunately a lot of God followers, a lot of Jewish people started to believe, and it was this, that the spirit of somebody can come back to life within 3 days. There was that common belief. And part of the reason why they believed that is they didn't know, like we know today, about like people being in a coma. And so what would happen was someone would go into a coma and they would come out of it 3 days later and like, oh, wow. So, maybe this is the pagan gods. That was their viewpoint. And unfortunately, if you look in the history of it, there was actually some people that were God followers that were even kind of buying into that mentality. Here's why. They were just trying to find some kind of hope. So Jesus picks 4 days on purpose. Because what he's trying to do is, I'm trying to go past the point of your own expectations. That you think it's just going to be 3 days. I'm going to make sure this guy's not just dead, he's dead. All right? And I don't know if y'all have those people in your life that are perpetually late. You're not the point, but just think about them for a second. As you think about them, it's the party's like at 2, and they roll up at 4 like nothing's going on. And they're like, what's up? Well, I'll tell you what's up. You miss grandma, blowing out the candle. And that's what's up. And, and they seem to be late to everything. In their eyes, Jesus is what we might call what? Fashionably late. But let's think about it more of like being functionally late. And as we stop there for just a second, here's what's happening. Lazarus is dying. Jesus is not moving. And I told you from the very beginning, the reason I love this text so much is we can see who God is in the middle of our disappointment, but we can also see who we are too. And as you think about that, notice these three responses in their eyes to Jesus being late. And as you go through this text, here's what I want you to see. There's three people, Thomas, Mary, and Martha. I want you to see which one you think you are and how you tend to deal with your Lazarus. Maybe some of you are like this. You're like Thomas, dead in your doubts. And a lot of times what's highlighted with Thomas is when Jesus resurrected and showed back up and he had his doubts, right? But we don't talk about this one a lot. This is the one that actually preceded that right after Lazarus is dying, Jesus is like, well, now we'll go. And so look what Thomas, known as Didymus, which is like a poor name for a rapper, it says this, said to his fellow disciples, let us also go that we may die with him. You see what he's saying? He's like, oh yeah, why don't we just go? Yeah, we'll go too and we'll die. He's saying that for two reasons. Number one, he's saying it because last time they were in this area, they tried to stone Jesus and them. The other reason he's saying this is he's like, he's dead. And so one commentary said this, a better way to describe Thomas in this moment would be sarcastic, doubting Thomas. So maybe that's where some of you have been and how you've dealt with your disappointments. You've doubted. Now, I told you earlier when it comes to doubt that there can be two forms of doubt. The first form is what we'll call a healthy doubt. And I'm not encouraging doubt in anybody, by the way. But what I am saying is that there's a healthy doubt and an unhealthy doubt. There's a healthy doubt that is poised to take a step forward, and here's why. It's open to answers. But there's an unhealthy doubt that has a lot of questions, but is not open to answers. Does that make sense? And so what's interesting about Thomas, as we're going to see later, he's got his questions, but here's what I do love, is he keeps bringing those to Jesus. He doesn't isolate always his faith from his doubt. When I was thinking about that Barna study about how 18 to 25-year-olds sometimes don't feel like they have a safe place to talk about and wrestle with those doubts, it made me think back to times here in college ministry. And I can't tell you how many times on that, y'all know the first Sunday when students move in, or that Saturday, and then a lot of their parents are here. It's an awesome Sunday. That was one of my favorite Sundays. The singing was incredible. The energy is awesome. But I would remember right after Bible class, so many of these parents that were dropping off their kids here at Faulkner, they would come up to me and be like, hey, this is Johnny, this is my little boy, and Johnny's going to be a great leader for you in the campus ministry. And he grew up, he did Laz Leaders, and he knows a lot of scripture. And then the next parent said, this is Susie. Susie's going to be a leader. I'm telling you, Susie's great. She grew up doing all the things and those kinds of things. And then here's what happened. By their senior year, I didn't see Johnny and I didn't see Susie. And what I learned about Johnny and Susie is that Johnny and Susie knew a lot of facts about Jesus. But Johnny and Susie, I don't think really knew Jesus. And the reason I say that is facts, yes, are very important, but it's very easy to walk away from facts, but it's very difficult to walk away from a person. And so, yes, it's good to know the facts. It's good to have an understanding. But do y'all remember what James said about that kind of understanding? Listening and understanding alone can be what? Self-deceiving. And so I guess what I'm saying is, as you have your doubts, but also as we raise our children, it's important to help them as they might deal, as they deal with disappointment in the future, to make sure they don't just know a bunch of facts about Jesus, but they actually know Jesus. The second one is this. Maybe it's Martha. And it kind of feels weird to say this because she's a woman, but if there's one person in this text that I connect with the most, is this lady, Martha. If you notice in the text what it says, so when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and she met him. And we're going to come back to her in just a second. Mary remained at the house. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you would have just been here, my brother would not have died. And by the way, this is the second time in the text Martha's like going back and forth. She's the one that's doing the meal tree. She's the one that's doing the sign-up genius. She's writing the eulogy, getting everybody together for the funeral. She's picking out the funeral songs. Like, that's Martha. She is a doer. She's a person that kind of gets things done. But here's the thing about people like Martha that are doers. They struggle with this one thing: delays. And if you are a Martha, you know what I'm talking about. That you like to see things done, you like to see things happen, but those of us that are Marthas, we don't like when things don't happen on our timetable. So maybe you're like Martha, and like we talked about earlier, that delay then starts to feel like a denial, and you're like, well, where is he? And because it didn't happen on my timeline, then it must not exist. Maybe Jesus had it in there for 4 days to make it dead, to work past the limit of your own expectation. Or maybe it's Mary that you are. Do y'all notice what it said about Mary? It says this: but Mary remained seated in the house. Maybe during a time of disappointment, that's you. That you're not like Martha, you get moving. You're not Thomas, you have your doubts. Maybe you're like Mary, that you go home and you just hide under the covers and you don't want to get out. And I want to say to that, number one, there is a time where you do need to just be by yourself. You need those moments where you're not near some people just to process some things. But one thing that's been interesting to hear from our counselors at church is how one of the worst things that you can do in a time of doubt and disappointment and discouragement is just to stay home. And I'm not saying it's easy, but one of the quickest ways, though, to get your mind off of yourself and the depths of despair that you're in is to serve somebody else. To love somebody else, to serve somebody else. So I don't know which one of those three you are, Mary, Martha, or Thomas. But here's what Jesus says in the middle of those three responses: your brother's going to rise again. Martha said, I know he will rise again at the resurrection the last day. So notice what she's saying. When Jesus said, hey, he's going to rise again, she said, oh yeah, one day I know, like, you know, when the trumpets sound and the dead are going to arise, I know he's going to be back. And he's like, oh, see, that's where you've missed it. You think that I'm talking about one day I'm going to do something. What does he say here? I am the resurrection and the life. He doesn't say I was. He doesn't say I will be. He says what? I am. This is really interesting because if you remember in Luke 10, in the parable of the Good Samaritan, what set the whole thing up was when that teacher came to him and he said this: teacher, what must I do to inherit what? Eternal life. So he's thinking what day? One day, right? Well, Jesus tells the parable of the Good Samaritan about loving the vulnerable, right? Those that are in distress, all those kind of things. And then this is what Jesus said. He said, do this and you will live. That's the Greek word zoe. So just like it is here and just like it was there, you had this one guy that said, hey, how can I have life one day? Jesus is like, no, I'm not talking about one day. I'm talking about now. Yes, I'm going to do something one day, but what I'm also wanting you to understand, I can do something today. And whenever I think about the resurrection of Jesus Christ, you're probably like I have been, maybe you're not. I think about it as something he did, and one day something he will do. I forget to think about it as something he can do right now. That when we put on Christ in baptism, we come out of that grave, we are alive. And the power of the resurrection is not something that's going to happen later. It says in that moment, he gives us life. So it's not just something in the past. It's not something just in the future. It's something that can happen right now. So I want you to think about that Lazarus. That one thing in your life that disappoints. That one thing that in your life right now that is hurting. He said, I'm telling you, I'm not just can one day or in the past, I can give life to that right now. See, what I think he's trying to do is this. In Luke 10 and here in John 11, is to be people that don't just think of heaven as something one day, but getting heaven in our hearts right now. Have you noticed in the book of Matthew how it keeps talking about the kingdom of heaven is here, the kingdom of heaven? The idea of the kingdom is something he's saying that with me, I'm ushering that in. And so that's us. But who is God? So in the middle of that disappointment, who is God? Well, notice this. It says, when she said this, she went and she called her sister Mary, saying in private, the teacher is here, and he's calling for you. When she heard it, she rose quickly and went to him. Is that not incredible? That in the middle of all of this, Jesus calls her name. What do you think that did for her? Well, I'll tell you what it did for her. It got her out from under the covers. She went to where he was. She rose quickly because Jesus what? Called her name. But then there was this. In chapter 11, verse 35, the shortest verse in the Bible, Jesus wept. So number one, he's calling her name. And then he sees this group of people and he weeps. Now there's two theories on why he weeps. One of those is he's weeping at their lack of faith. The other theory is that he's weeping because they're weeping. There's actually a third theory technically, and it's this, that it's both. He's a little bit frustrated that they're not believing, but he also sees how bought in they are with Lazarus, that when he sees their tears, he enters into that pain with them. Is that not pretty incredible to think about for just a second? That if you know, and I'm sorry to spoil this narrative for some of us, but if you know you're about to raise somebody from the dead, why are you going to weep? But does that not tell you a lot about our God? That even when he knows the ending, he still chooses to enter into the pain with you. Because I'll go ahead and tell you how I am. If I know the ending to something, I can't hide that I know the ending to something. It's going to impact how I behave. I'll give you an example. A few years ago when Florida State was good at football, we were playing in the ACC championship. And one of our family members decided to have a party that day. And so I didn't want to talk to anybody. I didn't want to see anybody that might talk about the game. Because what I did was I recorded the game at home. And so we had to drive from where we were and come to Robertsdale. And so I was very clear to people that knew I was a Florida State fan. I don't want to know about the ending of the game. And, I don't want to hear anything about it. And so I had done so good. Well, we exited because one of the kids needed to use the restroom. And when we did, it was first Saturday of December. This little town that we exited at had a Christmas parade. And we got called at the Christmas parade. The tractors, the cattle really decided to take their time throughout this parade. And so I'm just sitting there. And I'm not wanting to run, the car anymore to keep using the gas. So what I did is I rolled down all the windows. And this guy pulls up beside me. And he said, Florida State is dominating Duke tonight. I'm like, oh, no. And then I get a text, well, how about them Noles? And so then I was disappointed because they blew the ending for me. But I'll tell you, I still went home and I watched that. You know how I watched it? It was like the popcorn meme, like, yeah, I'm at peace right now because what? I know how it ends. Like, I can't help but not be like that. Yet, we have a God that, again, knows the ending, but still chooses to enter into our pain with us. Is that not incredible? But I also want to think about this too. We were made in that image, and Romans says this, that when we have people in our lives that are in a time of joy, guess what we do? We rejoice with them. And when people are weeping, we weep too. I think there's a lot we can learn from the empathy of Christ and the empathy of us. Empathy is very different than sympathy. Sympathy is, man, I'm sorry you're going through that. But empathy is entering into that pain with that person. Have you ever had somebody do that with you? You know what I'm saying? Like, you've had people before, they're like, man, I'm sorry for what you're going through. But then you had a whole nother group of people that showed up at the house. They sat there. They didn't really say much. They brought some meals. They said, hey, can I pray with you? When I was thinking about that, it made me think about the three things of empathy. And number one, when people do go through a difficult time, just sometimes be physically present. And I know for me, the thing that I used to feel like I had to do was to have the perfect thing to say. But the reality is when someone's going through a time of disappointment, there is nothing you can say that's going to eliminate the pain and the difficulty of what they're experiencing and going through. But I think about like the good friends Job had when he was in pain. They just sat there with him, right? Some of y'all might remember this was 2000, I'm trying to think what year that was, when Major Walker passed away. And he was a young man in our campus ministry. He was on his way to preach, and he fell asleep at the wheel and died in a car accident. And me and a guy named Phil, y'all might remember Phil Baus, we can't forget him. We decided to get in his car, and we decided to go visit Major's family near the Atlanta area. And I'll never forget when we got to the driveway of their house, I was telling Phil, I was like, man, I don't know what to say. Like, I'm so nervous about walking in there. And I wish I had the maturity then to realize it's nothing I'm going to say, but I'll never forget that he, who was younger than me, had the maturity to say, well, let's just pray about it. So we prayed, and we walked into that room, and it was a very painful sight to have to see a mom mourn like that, and a dad try to comfort a mourning wife like that. But you know what God did and how he answered our prayer? We walked into that room and God shut my mouth. We walked into that room and we sat down, and I'll never forget, after she hugged us, she said, you know, today, last year, Major, and she told me something funny he did, and that led to another story and another story. And then she said, actually, come here, can you for a second go with me to his room? And so we went to his room, and she said, do you see how the window sill's broken and there's still like a piece of cloth on it? He and a bunch of his friends were doing some goofy things one night. He snuck out of the house, but he's so big, he got caught in the window, couldn't get out. Part of his clothing was left there, and the frame of the window was broken. We come back in, and she's telling more stories and more stories, and we finally said, you know, after a little bit, said, well, we love you, and we just want to say a prayer with you, and we're going to head out. And so right after the prayer, I'll never forget, she said this. She said, I just want y'all to know that what you said is exactly what I needed to hear. And again, very humbling, because I realized we didn't say a thing. And so when we think about empathizing with people, it's not trying to figure out the answer to the problem, because we aren't the answer to the problem. In fact, if you think about it, it's kind of insulting and dangerous to think that we would ever be the answer to someone's problems. We're not. But in this text, we're seeing who is Jesus. To listen to them, to pray with them. So then it says this, Jesus deeply moved. I guess I missed this for years, but one of the commentaries pointed out that the word deeply moved is actually a poor translation for it. It actually said there in the Greek that he was angry. It was a picture of what was going to happen one day, how Jesus is angry at death, the sting of death. And so I used to read this, I used to read it almost like, you know, in the arms of the angels fly away from here, but it's actually more like Rocky theme music. As he's walking to that tomb, it says it was a cave and a stone was laying against it. And Jesus said, take away the stone. Martha, the sister of the dead man, said, well, by this time there's an odor. I love the King James here, because the King James says he stinketh. And so what she's basically saying, rigor mortis has already set in. And again, this guy is dead. She's like, good. That's why I waited so long. I wanted him to have the stench of death. And so he cried out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. And I love what one guy said. He said, if he would have said, arise, the whole tomb and every single continent and every single planet, right, would have what happened? Things would have come to life. But the man who died came out, and his hands and his feet were bound with linen strips, and his face was wrapped with a cloth, Jesus said to him, unbind him and let him go. I don't want you to miss this in this text. Notice that Jesus tells them to move the stone, and Jesus tells them to unwrap him. Can Jesus move a stone? Well, he's got a really good history with moving stones. So I dare to say he could probably move a stone. Could Jesus unwrap? Well, absolutely. But I think what he's illustrating is this: you cannot, and I cannot, during a time of disappointment, unbind myself. During a time of difficulty, during a time of doubt, and during a disappointment, you need two things. You need a community, the church, and you need Christ. You cannot unbind yourself. And if you think about it, we're a lot like this guy. We're like Lazarus in the fact that we were all dead, right? Colossians 2:13 says this, that we were dead in our trespasses, but God made us alive through Christ. We were dead. We stinketh, right? And the thing about us is it's not just the fact that, yes, we've got those hidden sins, but even, like, just think about how we operate on a daily basis. Like if someone put a monitor on your forehead of all the things you were thinking, would you want people to see that, right? We walk around and we stink, but yet he made us alive. We're also like this guy too, because we were people that were bound, but now we're free. I love this verse in Galatians 5. It says this, for Christ has set us free. So stand firm, therefore, and do not submit again to a yoke of slavery. The text goes on to say this, many of the Jews, therefore, who had come with Mary, had seen what he had did. They believed in him, but some of them went to the Pharisees and they told them what Jesus had done. So somebody called, 1-800-I-SAW-JESUS, and they did that. And the chief priests, the Pharisees, had given orders that if anybody knew where he was, he should let him know so that he could arrest him. Now let me ask you this. Did they have a problem with Lazarus before? I want you to think about that for a second. Did they have a problem with Lazarus before Jesus rose him from the dead? No. And in the same way, Satan is not threatened by you or me when we don't have that relationship with Christ. What threatens Satan is not the fact that we're alive, but the one that makes us alive. And so I think about this, that whenever you and I make that decision or made that decision to put on Christ, you know what Satan's thinking? He's like, oh, it's on. Because there's something different about him. There's something different about her. And what it goes on to say is this, that they gave a dinner for him. Martha served it, and Lazarus was one of those that was reclining at the table. I mean, just a little bit ago, he was wrapped in cloth stinking. Now he's sitting at a table. And you think about it, every single Sunday, we get to share in something called communion. And yes, that is a reminder of what Christ did. But I also want you to know that as he put that around a table, it's a reminder that we are the ones seating at that table. We are people that had no seat, but now we're seated. There's a story I came across about this man, and this is where we'll end tonight, that was dumpster diving. And he went out to the dumpster to get food, and it was like in this alleyway. He didn't have much money, and so he was trying to feed himself and his family. And the owner of the restaurant was carrying trash out, about to throw it in that dumpster, and he saw the man dumpster diving. And so he said to the man, he said, well, hey, listen, don't be afraid. I'm not getting on to you, but here's what I want to offer you. Is every single night, I'm going to set a table for you. I'm going to put out, the finest china. I'm going to put the 2 forks out. I'm going to put the glasses, all those kind of things. I want you to have this seat at the table. And so he sets this table, getting ready for that man to show up the very next night. The people come, the customers show up, and the man does not sit at that table. So he collects all the trash that he had from the food and everything that day, gets ready and throws it out in the dumpster. And when he throws it out in the dumpster, he sees that man dumpster diving again. Now we think, well, that makes no sense. Why would you choose to go after those scraps when you have a seat at the table? And the reason I say that is it kind of comes back to what we talked about in the very beginning, is that when we go through a time of disappointment, We either choose to turn to Yahweh, an uppercase G God, or a lowercase g God. Don't settle for those scraps. And so if we think about who God is during the middle of our disappointment, number one, he's a God that calls our name. Number two, he weeps with us. And number three, he gives us a seat at the table. So whatever disappointment it is, that Lazarus, that one thing that you need to come back to life, here's what I want you to do. I want to encourage you to bring it to our very, very empathetic God. And so if you're here tonight and you want prayers for your Lazarus, maybe there's some of you in this room that have never made that decision to give your life to Jesus Christ. I even think about maybe when you were a kid and you saw them passing around the plate and you see people drink the cup and the bread and you're like, what does that mean? Yeah, it looks back, it looks forward, but it's also a picture now. And you can experience that. Every single Sunday when we get to take that bread and that cup, it means so much because it's a reminder that you and I, who had no seat because of Jesus Christ, we have a seat at the table. And so if you're here tonight and you want to give your life to him, or you want to bring your Lazarus to him, please come while we stand and we sing the song together.
Let's pray together. Heavenly Father, we are very grateful that you brought us here tonight to come together to be a family, to be your body. We're grateful that we had the opportunity to hear from your word. And we ask that you continually encourage us and surround us with people that will encourage us to bring our disappointments to you, because you are the Almighty God, because nothing else can compare. Be with us as we leave this place and bring us back here safely to worship you again with one another. We love you. It's in your Son's name that we pray. Amen.